Emma Clarke's hands were shaking again, not from fear of the wealthy strangers she served every night at Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, but from exhaustion, 2 jobs, student loans piling up. A nursing school dream that felt more impossible with each passing month. She had memorized emergency protocols from library books she couldn't afford to buy, practiced medical procedures on her own time, all while being invisible to the people she served. Then Walter Sterling started choking, and Emma's trembling hands became the steadiest thing in that room. What happened in the next 60 seconds didn't just save a life, it changed everything. The Belvedere restaurant sat 60 floors above Manhattan, where the city lights sparkled like scattered diamonds, and a single reservation required 3 months' notice and connections most people would never have. Emma Clarke knew every table by number, every corner where the lighting hit just right for the wealthy guests' Instagram photos, every way to move through the dining room without being noticed. That was her talent, really. Disappearing. She adjusted her black uniform in the staff bathroom mirror, smoothing down fabric that had seen too many wash cycles, tucking a loose strand of dark hair back into the tight bun that gave her headaches by hour 6 of every shift. Her reflection looked tired, 26 years old, and she could pass for older on nights like this, when the bags under her eyes told the story of a 5 a.m. shift at the diner in Queens, 3 hours at the library studying medical terminology, and now this, the evening shift that paid well enough to keep her impossible dream on life support. The dream lived in a coffee can under her bed, $4,300, give or take. She counted it once a week, smoothing out the crumpled bills, organizing them by denomination like that somehow made the number grow faster, 12,000 by September. That was the deal with City College's nursing program. Come up with tuition for the first semester, and they'd take a chance on a 26-year-old waitress with good grades and a GED instead of a high school diploma. 8 months. She needed 8 months of perfect tips. No emergencies, no car breakdowns, no trips to urgent care that would eat into savings she couldn't afford to lose. The math haunted her at 2 a.m. when she couldn't sleep, when she lay awake calculating hourly wages against monthly expenses, against the impossible gap between where she was and where she needed to be. Emma, you're on the Sterling party tonight. Richard appeared in the bathroom doorway, his expression that particular blend of stern and satisfied that meant he was about to make someone's shift harder. The head manager had perfected the art of looking important while contributing very little, a skill Emma had observed with quiet fascination for 2 years. Private dining room, 8 guests, dinner service starts at 7 sharp. The Sterling party? Emma's voice came out smaller than she intended. Everyone knew about the Sterlings. Old money, the kind that built skyscrapers and funded museums and appeared in the society pages of newspapers normal people couldn't afford to buy. I thought Margaret was assigned. Margaret called in sick. You'll manage. Richard straightened his tie, admiring himself in the mirror beside Emma's tired reflection. Just water service and clearing plates. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't make eye contact. And for God's sake, try not to look so exhausted. He left before Emma could respond, his expensive shoes clicking away down the hall. Try not to look so exhausted, as if exhaustion was a choice, a switch she could flip off when wealthy people needed their water glasses refilled. Emma took a breath, the kind they taught in the free meditation videos she watched on YouTube when panic made her chest tight. In through the nose, count to 4, out through the mouth. This was just another shift. Just another room full of people who wouldn't remember her face 5 minutes after she left. The private dining room looked like something from a magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Manhattan skyline, the city stretching out below them like a promise or a threat, depending on which side of the table you sat. A crystal chandelier cast warm light over white linen tablecloths, silver so polished, Emma could see her reflection in the spoons flowers that probably cost more than her monthly rent. 8 place settings. 8 people whose bank accounts had more zeros than Emma's had numbers. She started with the water, moving along the table's edge with practiced efficiency. Fill the glass 2/3 full. Ice makes noise when it hits crystal, so pour slowly. Don't let the bottle touch the rim. These were the details that made the difference between being ignored and being fired, and Emma had learned them all. At the head of the table sat an older gentleman in his 70s, silver hair perfectly styled, a navy suit that probably cost more than Emma earned in 6 months. Walter Sterling, she'd heard Richard say, the patriarch, the man whose name was on half the buildings visible from these windows. Beside him, a younger man with the same sharp blue eyes and aristocratic features. This would be Alexander Sterling, the son, the one who'd taken over as CEO 2 years ago and made headlines for transforming the family business into something even more profitable. The rest of the table filled out with what Emma assumed were family members and business associates, women in dresses that cost more than Emma's car, men wearing watches that could pay for nursing school twice over. They talked about things Emma didn't understand, market positions and acquisition strategies, their voices carrying that particular ease of people who'd never worried about rent. Emma was refilling water glasses when she heard it. The conversation at the table had shifted to real estate, something about a development in Brooklyn, gentrification dressed up in economic terms. One of the women was laughing, a sound like wind chimes, delicate and expensive. Walter Sterling was saying something about property values when his voice suddenly stopped mid-sentence. At first, Emma thought he was just pausing for effect, the way rich people sometimes did in conversation, making others wait for their important words. But something felt wrong. The silence stretched too long. One of the women, Walter's wife, Emma guessed from the concern in her eyes, reached for his arm. "Walter? Darling?" Walter's hand went to his throat. Not dramatically, not the way actors did in movies, but with a simple, terrible recognition that something was very wrong. His face had gone from its healthy color to something darker, red creeping toward purple. He was trying to cough, but no sound came out. Just this horrible wheeze like air trying to move through a space that had suddenly become too small. The table erupted into motion. Chairs scraped back. Someone gasped. Alexander was on his feet, one hand on his father's shoulder, his composed businessman expression cracking into raw fear. "Dad? Dad, can you breathe?" Emma's training kicked in before her brain could catch up. Not training from any official course, but from the hundreds of hours she'd spent in library corners with second-hand medical textbooks, watching free videos online about emergency response, memorizing protocols she prayed she'd never need to use. This was a complete airway obstruction. She'd read about it in Chapter 7 of her emergency medicine book, the universal choking sign, the hand to the throat, the inability to cough or speak, the color change that meant oxygen wasn't reaching where it needed to go. Her hands stopped shaking. Later, Emma would think about that moment, how strange it was that her trembling, exhausted hands suddenly became steady the moment they were needed. Right now, she wasn't thinking at all. She was moving. "Sir, can you cough?" She heard her own voice, clearer than it had been in months, maybe years. Walter shook his head, his eyes wide with panic that needed no translation. Emma stepped behind him, her movements exactly as she'd memorized from the diagrams she'd drawn on napkins during slow shifts at the diner. One fist just above the navel, other hand wrapped around it, quick upward thrusts. The Heimlich maneuver, named after some doctor she'd never met but whose technique she'd practiced on a pillow in her apartment at 2 a.m. when she couldn't sleep for studying. "What are you?" someone started, but Emma wasn't listening. First thrust. Nothing. Walter's face was darkening further, purple shading toward blue. The horrible color that meant time was running out. That brain damage became a real risk after 2 minutes without oxygen. Second thrust. Still nothing. Emma adjusted her position, remembering what the video had said about angle and force. You needed real pressure, not the gentle version they showed in diagrams. Third thrust. Something shifted. Walter's body jerked forward, and a piece of steak the size of Emma's thumb shot across the table, landing with an almost obscene accuracy on a white linen napkin. Walter gasped, a huge rattling breath that was the most beautiful sound Emma had ever heard, and then another, his chest heaving with the desperate relief of air, finally reaching lungs again. The room fell silent. 8 pairs of eyes turned toward Emma Clarke, the invisible waitress, the girl who refilled water glasses and cleared plates without being seen. She stood there with her hands still positioned in the aftermath of saving Walter Sterling's life, her exhausted face flushed, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone in the room must be able to hear it. Alexander Sterling was staring at her like she'd materialized from nowhere, which in a way she had. For the first time that night, for maybe the first time in her entire 2 years at Belvedere, someone was actually seeing Emma, and she had absolutely no idea what to say. For 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours nobody moved. The private dining room had transformed into a frozen tableau, all those wealthy, powerful people suspended in the aftermath of watching their invisible waitress save Walter Sterling's life with her bare hands. Emma stood there, her arm still positioned from the Heimlich maneuver, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat, her exhausted face flushed with adrenaline that made her hands shake again, now that the crisis had passed. Walter Sterling was the first to break the silence. He turned in his chair, one hand still pressed to his chest as he took deep, grateful breaths, his color slowly returning from that terrible purple to something closer to human. When he looked at Emma, his eyes held something she'd never seen directed at her before. Recognition, real recognition. Not the vague acknowledgement of a person who served food, but the intense focus of someone who understood they'd just been pulled back from the edge of something permanent. "You—" His voice came out rough, damaged from the trauma his throat had just endured. "What's your name?" Emma's mouth went dry. In 2 years at Belvedere, none of the guests in the private dining rooms had ever asked her name. "Emma. Emma Clarke, sir." "Emma Clarke." Walter repeated it slowly, like he was memorizing something important. "You just saved my life." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same certainty he probably used in boardrooms when making decisions that moved millions of dollars. "Yes, sir. The Heimlich maneuver." "You were choking," Emma heard herself explaining, her voice steadier than she felt. "Complete airway obstruction. I could tell from the way you couldn't cough or speak, and your color was—" She stopped, suddenly aware that everyone was staring at her. The medical terminology that came so naturally when she studied at 2 a.m. sounded strange in this elegant room, in her exhausted voice. "How did you know how to do that?" This was Alexander Sterling, moving closer, his sharp blue eyes fixed on Emma with an intensity that made her want to step back. But there was nowhere to go. She was pinned by their attention, all these people finally seeing her, and she had no idea what to do with being seen. "I study." The words came out simple, almost stupid. "Emergency medicine. I want to be a nurse. I read about it in a textbook." "You read about it in a textbook." Alexander's tone wasn't mocking, but there was something in it Emma couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe, or disbelief that someone had learned a life-saving procedure from a book rather than formal training. "And you just knew what to do?" "I've memorized the protocols." Emma could feel heat rising in her cheeks, embarrassment mixing with the adrenaline that still flooded her system. "I practiced the positioning. I know I'm not certified. I know I should probably have taken an actual course, but I couldn't afford—" She cut herself off. These people didn't need to hear about money, about choosing between a $40 first aid certification and 2 weeks of groceries. "You couldn't afford what?" Walter Sterling was standing now, one hand still on the table for support, his expensive suit wrinkled from the ordeal. His wife hovered beside him, her manicured hands fluttering with concern, but Walter's focus remained locked on Emma. "It doesn't matter." Emma took a breath, trying to find the invisible version of herself again, the one who could fade into the background and let these people return to their important dinner. "I should check if you need anything else. Water, perhaps, or—" "Emma Clarke." Alexander Sterling stepped closer, and Emma realized for the first time how tall he was, how his presence seemed to fill space in a way that had nothing to do with physical size and everything to do with the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about rent or bus fare, or whether your shoes would last another month. "My father asked you a question. What couldn't you afford?" There was no anger in his voice, but there was something else. Curiosity, maybe, or that particular kind of interest that wealthy people sometimes developed when they encountered something unexpected, like finding a rare artifact in an unexpected place. Emma had seen it before, in guests who occasionally noticed her and asked questions they forgot the answers to 5 minutes later. "The certification course for first aid," Emma heard herself answering, her exhaustion making her honest in a way she normally wouldn't be. "It's $40 for the basic course, more for the advanced. I teach myself instead. Library books, free online videos. It's not the same as real training, but it's what I can manage." The room had gone quiet again, but this was a different kind of silence. The guests were exchanging glances, the kind of wordless communication that happened among people who'd known each other for years. Emma recognized the look. It was the same expression people got at the diner when they left large tips, that blend of pity and satisfaction that came from feeling generous towards someone whose life they couldn't really imagine. "Well," Walter Sterling's voice had regained some of its strength, though it still carried the rough edge of trauma. "Whatever you paid for those library books, it was worth every penny. You knew exactly what to do, exactly when to do it. No hesitation." "That's not something you learn just from reading, Miss Clarke. That's instinct combined with knowledge. That's the mark of someone who's meant to be in medicine." Something twisted in Emma's chest at those words. Meant to be in medicine. As if meaning was enough, as if wanting something badly enough could overcome the mathematics of poverty, the equation that said $12,000 minus $4,300 left a gap that felt impossible to bridge in 8 months. "Thank you, sir." Emma's voice came out quieter than she intended. "I'm glad I could help." "Glad you could help?" Walter's wife spoke for the first time, her cultured accent making even simple words sound elegant. "Darling, she saved your life." "Glad seems rather insufficient." She turned to Emma, her diamonds catching the chandelier light. "What's your full name, dear? I want to make sure management knows what happened here tonight." Panic flashed through Emma's exhaustion. Management. Richard, who told her not to speak unless spoken to, not to make eye contact, to try not to look so tired. Richard, who treated the staff like interchangeable pieces in a machine that existed solely to make wealthy guests comfortable. If he found out Emma had touched a guest, even to save his life, she had no idea what might happen. This job was her best source of income. Losing it would mean goodbye to nursing school, goodbye to the dream she'd been building $1 bill at a time. "Mrs. Sterling, that's really not necessary," Emma started. "Caroline, please call me Caroline." The older woman's smile was warm, genuine in a way that made Emma's throat tight. "And it's absolutely necessary. What you did tonight was extraordinary. You should be recognized for it." "I was just doing what anyone would do." The words came automatically, the way Emma had been trained to minimize herself, to take up less space, to not make waves or draw attention, or do anything that might disrupt the careful balance of knowing her place. "That's not true." Alexander Sterling's voice cut through Emma's automatic deflection. "Most people would have frozen. Most people would have panicked or called for help and waited for someone else to handle it. You saw what needed to be done, and you did it. Without hesitation, without asking permission. That's not something anyone would do. That's something very few people would do." Emma didn't know how to respond to that. She stood there in her wrinkled uniform, her too tight shoes that gave her blisters, her hair escaping from its bun, and felt the weight of all these eyes on her, seeing her, really seeing her, maybe for the first time in her life. It should have felt good. This was what she dreamed about, wasn't it? Being recognized for her knowledge, for her capabilities, for being more than just the invisible girl who refilled water glasses. But it didn't feel good. It felt terrifying, because Emma had learned a long time ago that when wealthy people noticed you, when they decided you were interesting or different or worth paying attention to, it rarely ended well for the person being noticed. They had too much power, too many resources, too many ways to help or hurt depending on their mood, and you never knew which way it would go until it was too late to protect yourself. "I should get back to work." Emma took a step toward the door, desperate to escape this attention, to disappear back into the familiar safety of being invisible. "Please, enjoy the rest of your dinner." "Wait." Walter Sterling's command was gentle but absolute. "Emma, please, stay a moment longer." And because he was Walter Sterling, because his name was on half the buildings in Manhattan, because saying no to men like him wasn't really an option when you were a 26-year-old waitress with a GED and a dream you couldn't afford, Emma stayed. Walter Sterling lowered himself back into his chair with the careful movements of someone who'd just remembered his own mortality. His color had fully returned now. The terrifying purple faded to his normal, healthy pink, but something in his eyes had changed. Emma recognized that look from the night her brother Danny had his asthma attack, that particular awareness that came from dancing too close to the edge and living to remember it. "Sit down, please." Walter gestured to an empty chair at the table, and Emma's stomach dropped. Guests didn't ask staff to sit. Staff stood at attention, ready to serve, background players in the theater of wealthy people's lives. Sitting at the table would be crossing a line she couldn't uncross, stepping into a space that wasn't hers and might never be. "Sir, I really should—" "Emma," Caroline Sterling's voice was warm but firm. "Please, you just saved my husband's life. The least we can do is let you sit for a moment." Emma glanced toward the door, half hoping Richard would appear and give her an excuse to leave, even if it meant facing his anger later. But the doorway remained empty, and 8 pairs of eyes were watching her, waiting. She pulled out the chair and sat, feeling the expensive upholstery against her back, her cheap uniform out of place against the elegance surrounding her. "Tell me about nursing school." Walter leaned forward, his hands clasped on the white linen tablecloth. "You said you're trying to get into a program." Emma's mouth went dry. This felt like a trap, though she couldn't explain why. "City College. I was accepted conditionally. I need to save $12,000 for first semester tuition by September, "And how much have you saved?" This was Alexander, his sharp businessman's eyes assessing her in a way that made Emma want to disappear back into invisibility. "A little over 4,000. Emma heard the defeat in her own voice, the mathematics of impossibility laid bare. 4 months left, $7,800 to go, and she was already working every hour she could physically manage without collapsing. The Sterling family members exchanged those looks again, wordless communication passing between them like a language Emma didn't speak. She recognized the dynamic from her psychology textbook, the way tight-knit families developed their own codes, their own ways of agreeing without speaking. Whatever they were deciding, she wasn't part of the conversation. "What if you didn't have to wait?" Walter's voice cut through Emma's spiraling thoughts. "I'm sorry?" Emma looked up, confused. "What if you didn't have to wait until September? What if you could start nursing school now or next semester at least? All expenses paid." Walter said it simply, like he was offering her a glass of water instead of completely rewriting the trajectory of her life. Emma's heart stopped, started again, pounded so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. I don't understand. It's quite simple." Walter smiled, and Emma saw where Alexander got his commanding presence. "You saved my life tonight. I'd like to thank you by ensuring you can pursue your dream of becoming a nurse. I'll cover your tuition, all of it, 4 years at City College, or whichever program you prefer." The room tilted. Emma gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white against the white linen. This didn't happen. Things like this didn't happen to girls like her, girls who counted dollar bills at 2 a.m. and calculated bus fare against grocery money. This was a story, a fantasy, the kind of thing that only existed in the romance novels she sometimes read on her phone when she was too exhausted to study, but too wired to sleep. "Mr. Sterling, I can't possibly accept—" "Why not?" Alexander interrupted, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice. "You performed emergency medical care that saved my father's life. In any hospital you'd be compensated for that service. Consider this compensation. But I'm not certified. I'm not a professional. Emma was stumbling over her words, her exhausted brain trying to process what was happening and failing completely. "You knew exactly what to do." Caroline reached across the table, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she placed her hand over Emma's. Her skin was soft, moisturized, the hands of someone who'd never washed dishes in a diner or scrubbed floors, or worked until her palms bled. But her touch was genuine, warm. "Training doesn't always come with certificates, dear. Sometimes it comes from dedication and hard work and studying at the library, because you can't afford the official courses. That's not less valuable. In many ways, it's more impressive." Emma felt something hot building behind her eyes. She couldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of these people who were offering her everything she dreamed about. But the pressure in her chest was unbearable. Years of exhaustion and hope and desperate calculation suddenly cracking open at the possibility that maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to be so hard. "There's one condition." Walter's voice brought Emma back to the moment, and there it was. The catch. The price. Emma had known it was too good to be true, known that offers like this always came with strings attached, with expectations that would tie her to these people in ways she couldn't predict or control. She pulled her hand back from Caroline's gentle grip, bracing herself. "What condition?" Her voice came out flat, protective. "I want you to work for me while you're in school." Walter straightened in his chair, and Emma saw the businessman emerging fully now, the person who'd built an empire making a proposal he'd clearly already thought through completely. "Part-time, 20 hours a week. You'll assist our company's health and safety director, help develop our emergency response protocols, maybe do some basic first aid training for staff. We have 3,000 employees across 5 buildings. Your practical knowledge would be invaluable." Emma stared at him. "You want to hire me? To do medical work, when I'm not even certified? "I want to hire you to help our certified professionals implement better emergency procedures," Walter clarified. "You won't be practicing medicine. You'll be using your knowledge to help create systems that keep people safe. It's completely legal, and it pays $35 an hour." $35 an hour. Emma did the math automatically, the way she always did. 20 hours a week, $700 weekly, $2,800 a month, more than she made at both her current jobs combined, and she'd only be working half the hours. It was impossible. It was too much. It was everything she'd been killing herself to achieve, handed to her on a silver platter, by a man whose life she'd saved with a technique learned from a library book. Why? The question came out raw, stripped of politeness or professionalism. Why would you do this? Because you gave me my life back. Walter's voice softened, and Emma saw genuine emotion in his eyes. Because in 30 seconds of crisis, you showed more competence and courage than most people demonstrate in a lifetime. Because I have the resources to help you, and choosing not to help when I easily could would make me the kind of person I don't want to be. And because you're exactly the kind of person we need in healthcare, Alexander added, his tone businesslike, but not unkind. Dedicated, resourceful, able to act under pressure. Those aren't qualities you can learn in a classroom, Emma. You either have them or you don't. You have them. Emma looked around the table at these wealthy, powerful people who were casually offering to transform her life. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to grab this opportunity with both hands before it could evaporate like every other hope she'd ever dared to hold. But another part, the part that had learned to be cautious, to protect herself, to not trust in good fortune because it always came with a price, held her back. I need to think about it. The words surprised her even as she said them. Of course. Walter nodded, and if he was disappointed, he didn't show it. Take all the time you need. Alexander, give her your card. Alexander pulled out a business card from his jacket pocket, the kind of thick, expensive cardstock that Emma had only ever seen in movies. He held it out to her across the table, and Emma took it with fingers that trembled slightly. The card was heavy, embossed with elegant lettering. Alexander Sterling, CEO, Sterling Holdings. Below that, a phone number and email address. My direct line, Alexander said. Call or email when you've made your decision. So if you have any questions about anything. Emma slipped the card into her pocket, feeling its weight against her hip like a promise or a threat. Thank you for the offer, for... She didn't know how to finish that sentence. For seeing her, for offering to save her from the exhaustion that was slowly breaking her down, for making her dream feel possible for the first time in years. Thank you for saving my father's life. Alexander's blue eyes met hers, and Emma saw something in them she couldn't quite name. Respect, maybe, or recognition of a kindred spirit, someone else who worked hard and fought for what they wanted. The rest is just logistics. But it wasn't just logistics, and they both knew it. It was everything. It was the difference between Emma's impossible dream, staying impossible forever, and becoming something she could actually reach. It was the line between breaking herself down, trying to save enough money, and having the support to build herself up into the nurse she'd always wanted to be. I should get back to work. Emma stood, her legs unsteady beneath her. Please let me know if you need anything else this evening. Just one more thing. Walter stood as well, moving with the stiffness of someone whose body had just been through trauma. He extended his hand toward Emma, formal but warm. Thank you, Miss Clarke. Truly, you have my deepest gratitude. Emma shook his hand, feeling the firm grip of a man who was used to sealing deals and making things happen. Then she shook Caroline's hand and Alexander's and worked her way around the table as the other guests murmured their thanks and admiration. Their touches were brief, their words polite, but Emma felt the weight of every handshake, every thank you, every look that said you're not invisible anymore. When she finally escaped back into the main dining room, Emma's legs almost gave out. She made it to the staff bathroom and locked herself in a stall, pressing her forehead against the cool metal door, trying to breathe through the overwhelming surge of emotions that threatened to drown her. In her pocket, Alexander Sterling's business card felt like it was burning through the fabric. One phone call could change everything. One decision could make her dream real. Instead of a fantasy she chased through library books and free online videos and exhausted hope at 2 a.m. But Emma had learned a long time ago that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. And she had 8 hours left in her shift to figure out what the real price of Walter Sterling's gratitude might actually be. Emma made it through the rest of her shift on autopilot, her body performing the familiar choreography of service, while her mind spun in circles around Walter Sterling's offer. She refilled water glasses without seeing the tables, cleared plates without registering the food, smiled at guests whose faces blurred into a wealthy, indistinguishable mass. The business card in her pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. At 1:30 a.m., Emma finally clocked out, her feet screaming in shoes that should have been replaced months ago, her back aching from hours of standing, her head pounding with exhaustion and possibility. The night air hit her face when she stepped outside, cool and sharp, carrying the metallic smell of the city that never quite slept. Manhattan stretched around her in all directions, buildings full of people with problems she couldn't imagine, wealth she'd never touch, Lives lived in a different universe from her own. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Maya, her roommate and the closest thing Emma had to family these days. "How was work? You okay? There's leftover pizza if you're hungry." Simple words, the kind of casual care that came from living with someone long enough to know their schedule, their struggles, their dreams that kept getting deferred by reality. Emma started typing a response, then stopped. How could she explain what had happened tonight? How could she put into words the impossible offer that might be exactly what she needed, or might be the mistake that destroyed everything she'd worked so hard to build? The subway ride back to Queens passed in a blur of fluorescent lights and late-night passengers, each person carrying their own exhaustion, their own stories Emma would never know. She emerged at her stop and walked the 6 blocks to the apartment she shared with Maya, a one-bedroom where they divided the space with a curtain so Emma could sleep on a mattress on the floor and pretend she had privacy. It wasn't much, but it was hers, paid for with tips and double shifts and the kind of relentless grinding that made dreams feel more like punishment than hope. Maya was waiting up, curled on their second-hand couch with a textbook open across her lap. She was studying to be a teacher, working retail to pay her way through community college, another 20-something trying to build something better from nothing. When she saw Emma's face, she closed the book immediately. "Okay, what happened? You look like you saw a ghost." Maya's voice carried the familiar accent of the Bronx, warm and direct in equal measure. Emma sat down heavily on the couch, pulled the business card from her pocket, and started talking. The words tumbled out in a rush. Walter Sterling choking, the Heimlich maneuver, the offer of tuition and a job that paid more in 20 hours than Emma currently made in 60. Maya listened without interrupting, her dark eyes growing wider with each detail, until Emma finally fell silent, wrung out and waiting for her friend's verdict. "Holy shit." Maya breathed the words like a prayer. "Emma, this is it. This is what you've been killing yourself for. Someone's actually offering to just give it to you. Nothing's free." Emma heard the bitterness in her own voice, years of experience teaching her that every offer came with strings attached, every gift had a price that wouldn't be named until you were too invested to refuse it. "Sometimes things are free." Maya grabbed Emma's hand, her grip warm and solid and real. "Sometimes good things happen to good people who deserve them. You saved that man's life, Em. You earned this." "Did I?" Emma pulled her hand back, stood up, started pacing the small living room like movement might help her think more clearly. "I just did what anyone would do, what I've been studying to do. It's not like I did something extraordinary. You saved someone's life with knowledge you taught yourself because you couldn't afford the official courses." Maya's voice held an edge now, frustration creeping into her usual warmth. "That's literally the definition of extraordinary. Stop minimizing it." Emma stopped pacing, pressed her forehead against the cool wall, felt the weight of every choice she'd made in the past 8 years pressing down on her shoulders. "What if I say yes and they change their mind? What if I quit my jobs and start school and then they decide I'm not worth it anymore? What if there's some catch I don't see yet? What if you say no and spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been?" Maya countered softly. "What if you keep killing yourself working 3 jobs and you never make it to nursing school? What if this is your one chance and you're too scared to take it?" The questions hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and risk in equal measure. Emma thought about the coffee can under her bed, the $4,300 that represented hundreds of double shifts, thousands of hours standing on feet that ached, saying yes sir and no ma'am to people who never looked at her face. She thought about the library books with their worn pages, the free videos she watched at 2 a.m., the practice questions she wrote on napkins when the diner was slow. She thought about her brother Danny, gasping for air while paramedics saved his life with calm hands and certain knowledge, and how she'd known in that moment exactly what she wanted to be. "I'm terrified." Emma turned to face Maya, the admission raw and honest. "What if I'm not good enough? What if they see through me and realize I'm just a waitress who reads medical books?" "You're not just anything." Maya stood, crossed the small room, pulled Emma into a fierce hug that smelled like cheap shampoo and retail store air freshener and home. "You're someone who studies emergency medicine on her breaks. You're someone who saves lives with techniques learned from library books. You're someone who works harder than anyone I know to chase a dream that everyone says is impossible. That's who you are. Not just a waitress, never just anything." Emma felt something crack open in her chest, that careful wall she'd built around her hope to protect it from disappointment. Maybe Maya was right. Maybe sometimes good things happened to people who'd worked hard enough to deserve them. Maybe this wasn't a trap or a mistake or something too good to be true. Maybe it was just an opportunity, the kind she'd been waiting for her entire adult life. I'm going to call him tomorrow. The words came out steady, certain, feeling more right than anything Emma had said in months. I'm going to say yes. Maya grinned, that wide, beautiful smile that had gotten them both through the worst nights, when exhaustion and poverty made the future feel impossible. Hell yes you are. Now eat some pizza and tell me everything about this Alexander Sterling guy, because from the way you described him, I'm thinking there's more to this story than just the job offer. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. It's not like that. He was there. His father almost died. It's not romantic, Maya. Uh-huh. Maya pulled the pizza box from the tiny refrigerator, her eyes sparkling with the kind of mischief that had been getting them both into trouble since they'd met at the diner 3 years ago. That's why you've mentioned his blue eyes twice, and the way he commanded the room and how he said your knowledge was invaluable. Totally not romantic. I'm focusing on nursing school. Emma took a slice of cold pizza, grateful for something to do with her hands. Not on complicated relationships with my boss's son. He wouldn't technically be your boss. His father would be your boss, Maya pointed out, practical as always. Which means Alexander Sterling would just be a very attractive, very wealthy man who thinks you're extraordinary. Emma threw a napkin at her friend, but she was smiling for the first time all night, some of the terrible weight lifting from her shoulders. Tomorrow she would call. Tomorrow she would say yes. Tomorrow she would step into a future that had seemed impossible just hours ago, when she was refilling water glasses and dreaming of the day when her hands might do more than serve food to people who never saw her face. Tonight, she would eat cold pizza with her best friend and let herself imagine what it might feel like to stop running so hard, just to stay in place. Tonight, she would hold Walter Sterling's card in her hands and feel the weight of possibility instead of the crushing pressure of impossibility. Tonight, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Emma Clarke would let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved something good. At 3 a.m., lying on her mattress on the floor with the city sounds filtering through thin walls, Emma pulled out her phone and read Alexander Sterling's card one more time in the dim glow of her screen. His direct line, his personal email, an invitation into a world she'd never imagined accessing, offered because she'd done what she'd always dreamed of doing, using medical knowledge to save someone's life. She composed an email, deleted it, started again, deleted that too. On the third try, she kept it simple. Mr. Sterling, this is Emma Clarke. I'd like to accept your father's offer. When would be convenient to discuss the details? Thank you, Emma. She read it over 5 times, checking for typos, for anything that might sound presumptuous or ungrateful or too eager. Finally, at 3:47 a.m., when exhaustion was making her brave and possibility felt more real than fear, she pressed send. The email left her phone with a soft whoosh, carrying her yes into the digital ether, toward a future she couldn't predict, but had finally decided to reach for with both hands. Emma set her phone aside, closed her eyes, and for the first time in months fell asleep, not calculating how many dollars she needed to save or how many hours she needed to work, but imagining what it might feel like to walk into a nursing school classroom and know she'd finally made it. She didn't see the response that came at 4:23 a.m., the reply that would be waiting when she woke up 5 hours later. But Alexander Sterling was apparently the kind of man who also worked at 4 a.m., who responded to life-changing emails in the dark hours of the morning. Emma, I'm glad. Are you free Tuesday at 2 p.m.? We'll finalize everything then. And Emma, welcome to Sterling Holdings. Alexander. The beginning of everything was already in motion. Emma just didn't know it yet. 3 months later, Emma Clarke stood in front of the mirror in a bathroom that wasn't the staff bathroom at Belvedere, wearing scrubs that weren't a waitress uniform, holding a stethoscope that represented everything she'd fought for and almost given up on. Her reflection looked different, not just the clothes or the absence of exhaustion in her eyes, but something deeper. She looked like someone who belonged where she was standing. City College's nursing program was harder than anything Emma had imagined, but it was the kind of hard that felt right, that pushed her toward competence instead of just survival. The medical terminology she'd taught herself from library books became the foundation for understanding complex physiological systems. The emergency protocols she'd memorized at 2 a.m. were now practiced in simulation labs with actual equipment and trained instructors who called her gifted, natural, exactly the kind of student they hoped for. Working at Sterling Holdings was nothing like working at Belvedere. Emma had her own small office in the health and safety department, a space with her name on the door, and a desk that didn't fold up at the end of each shift. She developed emergency response protocols for all 5 Sterling buildings, trained staff in basic first aid, worked alongside certified professionals who treated her like a colleague rather than someone who existed solely to serve them. The work was challenging, meaningful, exactly what she'd dreamed of doing since the night paramedics saved Danny's life. And $35 an hour felt like a fortune after years of calculating bus fare against groceries. Emma had moved to a studio apartment with actual walls instead of curtains, paid off her outstanding debts, and still managed to save money in a coffee can that now held emergency funds rather than desperate hope. But it wasn't just the job or the school or the financial security that had changed Emma's life. It was the people. Walter Sterling checked in with her monthly, inviting her to lunch at restaurants she used to work in, asking about her classes with genuine interest, sharing stories about building his business from the ground up. He treated her like family, like someone whose success mattered to him personally rather than professionally. Caroline had invited Emma to a charity gala, helped her pick out a dress that cost more than Emma's first car, introduced her to Manhattan's elite as the remarkable young woman who saved my husband's life. And then there was Alexander. Emma told herself it was just professional courtesy when he stopped by her office to check on projects, just friendly interest when he asked about her nursing classes over coffee in the Sterling Holdings break room. Just coincidence that they kept running into each other in hallways and elevators, that their conversations about emergency protocols somehow drifted into discussions about books and childhood and the strange experience of trying to belong in worlds that didn't quite fit. But Maya had been right as usual. There was something there. Something neither of them had acknowledged yet, but both of them felt. Today was Tuesday, and Emma had a meeting with Alexander at 2 p.m., exactly 3 months after her first day at Sterling Holdings. As she walked through the building toward the executive floor, Emma couldn't help but marvel at how different this felt from that night at Belvedere, when she'd been invisible and exhausted and convinced her dreams were impossible. Alexander's office was floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist furniture, the kind of space that projected power and success without trying too hard. He stood when Emma entered, that small gesture of respect she still wasn't used to receiving. "Emma, thanks for coming." His smile was warm, reaching those sharp blue eyes that had watched her save his father's life 3 months ago. "Have a seat. I wanted to discuss your progress." Emma sat in one of the leather chairs across from his desk, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from trembling. Old habits died hard. "Is everything okay? The emergency protocols for the new building are on schedule." "Everything's more than okay," Alexander interrupted gently. "Emma, your work has been exceptional. Our incident response times have improved by 40%. Staff satisfaction with safety training is at an all-time high. And Dr. Morrison says you're the best assistant he's had in 15 years. "Oh." Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. Compliments still felt foreign, like clothes that didn't quite fit. "Thank you. I've really enjoyed the work." "How's nursing school?" Alexander leaned back in his chair, and Emma noticed he looked different too. More relaxed than he had that first night, when his father was choking and fear had cracked through his composed businessman exterior. Challenging, amazing, exactly what I'd hoped. Emma let herself smile, thinking about the simulation lab where she'd successfully intubated a mannequin yesterday, the rotation in the emergency department that started next month, the future that had stopped feeling like a fantasy and started feeling like something she was actually building. "I can't thank your family enough for making it possible. You earned it." Alexander's voice carried that same certainty it had 3 months ago when he'd told her that saving his father's life wasn't something anyone would do. "Emma, I actually asked you here for something specific." Emma's stomach tightened. Here it came. The catch she'd been waiting for, the price for this opportunity that had seemed too good to be true. "We're expanding our healthcare initiatives, opening a corporate wellness center in our main building." Alexander pulled a folder from his desk, slid it across to Emma. "We need someone to help design the emergency medical protocols, train the staff, work with our physicians to create comprehensive first response systems. It would be a promotion, $50 an hour. More responsibility, but also more autonomy to build something really significant." Emma opened the folder, her eyes scanning job descriptions and organizational charts, and a title that made her heart race: Emergency Medical Services Coordinator. This This is a leadership position. Yes, and you're the right person for it. Alexander leaned forward, his blue eyes serious. I know you're still in nursing school. This position would work around your class schedule. And Emma, between you and me, this isn't charity or gratitude. This is good business. You're exceptional at this work. We'd be lucky to have you lead this initiative. Emma stared at the folder, at the future she'd never imagined having, at the opportunity to build something meaningful instead of just surviving shift to shift. Can I think about it? Her voice came out quiet, careful. Take all the time you need. Alexander stood, walked around his desk, and leaned against it in a way that felt casual, approachable. Nothing like the intimidating CEO she'd first met. But Emma, can I say something off the record? Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. When you saved my father's life, you changed mine too. Alexander's voice was soft, honest in a way that felt different from business negotiations or professional courtesy. Not just because you saved him, but because you reminded me what matters. You work harder than anyone I know. You study emergency medicine in your spare time because you genuinely want to help people. You turned down this job offer initially because you were worried about the strings attached, not because you didn't want the opportunity. That kind of integrity is rare. I'm not sure I'm as extraordinary as you think I am. Emma heard the old defensive patterns in her voice, the instinct to minimize herself that came from years of being invisible. Then let me be sure for both of us. Alexander smiled, and Emma's heart did something complicated in her chest. You saved a life with library books and determination. You're at the top of your nursing class while working 20 hours a week. You've revolutionized our emergency protocols in 3 months. Emma Clarke, you are exactly as extraordinary as I think you are, maybe more. The silence between them felt different now, charged with something neither of them had named yet, but both of them recognized. Emma stood, the folder clutched in her hands like a lifeline. I'll let you know about the position by Friday. Her voice was steadier now, carrying the confidence she'd been slowly building over 3 months of proving to herself that she belonged in this world. And Alexander, thank you for believing in me, for seeing me when I was invisible. You were never invisible, Emma. Alexander's voice followed her toward the door. You were just waiting for the right moment to be seen. Emma paused in the doorway, looked back at this man who'd offered her a future instead of just a job, who'd watched her save his father's life and decided she was worth investing in. That night at Belvedere, when your father was choking, I was terrified. But I was more terrified of doing nothing and living with that regret. And now? Alexander asked softly. Now I'm learning to be terrified and do it anyway. Emma smiled, that real, genuine smile that came from hope instead of obligation. It turns out that's where all the good things are, on the other side of terror. 3 months ago, Emma Clarke had been a waitress saving pennies in a coffee can, invisible to everyone except herself. Tonight, she would sit in her own apartment and decide whether to take a leadership position at one of Manhattan's most prestigious companies. Tomorrow, she would attend nursing school classes where professors called her gifted. Next week, she would have lunch with Walter and Caroline Sterling, who treated her like family. And somewhere in all of that, she would figure out what to do about Alexander Sterling's blue eyes and the way his belief in her made Emma believe in herself. The shy waitress who saved a millionaire's father had become something else entirely. Not because saving a life had transformed her, but because Emma had finally let herself be seen. And it turned out that being seen, being valued, being recognized for who she truly was, that was its own kind of miracle. Sometimes the most extraordinary thing you can do is let yourself believe you deserve something extraordinary in return. Emma was still learning that lesson one day at a time, but she was learning, and that was enough.